Imagine sitting in the dark. The power is out. No solar panels, no wind turbines, not even a connection to the grid. But suddenly, you flip a homemade switch and this mystery device lights up, throwing sparks and energy across the room. Today, I'm revealing a way to make free power with stuff you'd never expect. This isn't solar, this isn't wind. This is something that could change everything you thought you knew about electricity. Ready to see the shocking secret? Let's begin. Before we get deep into the weeds, don't forget, if you appreciate no fluff explorations into the world of practical economics and behind-the-scenes reality, hit subscribe. This is Boring Economic Update, where we make the unexpected ways of the world a little easier to understand. You'll want to stick around because, frankly, what's coming next isn't in your typical science class. All right, first, let's strip away all glamour. This isn't about high-tech gadgets or a billionaire's bunker. Think about this as pure necessity. Imagine yourself after a storm or on a remote stretch of highway in Arizona or living in a cabin off the trail in Washington State's wild country. You're not MacGyver, you're just someone with the same basic needs as everyone else. Light, a little warmth, maybe a coffee in the morning. No sun blazing, no wind howling, no cable to plug in. There's nothing inherently easy about generating electricity this way. It's often a test of patience, practicality, and basic resources. But it can be done, and it's been done for generations, in more places than you'd think. Let's start with a trip to the 19th century. Picture a small, isolated mining town in Colorado, back before the grid made its way up the mountains. When night came, people still wanted light. In the absence of sun and wind, miners turned to what they did have, coal and wood. Enter the thermoelectric generator, a device that uses what's known as the Seebeck effect. This effect turns heat directly into electricity using two different types of metal pressed together. As one side heats up, maybe by a wood stove or coal flame, and the other side stays cool, electrons start moving. That means power. We call these devices TEGs in short. If you think it's science fiction, you should know the same principle runs your remote control sensors and keeps satellites warm and running in the freezer of deep space. But it can work at home too, or in that blackout cabin. Now, early miners didn't have neat factory-built TEGs sitting on the store shelf. But in 2026, you can order them online, snap them to your wood stove, and power up a USB device. No sunlight, no wind required. There are limits, sure. The electricity comes in small doses, suitable for charging your phone, maybe running a tiny fan or giving you light, but it's real, reliable, and incredibly low maintenance. Imagine the quiet, that soft orange glow in the darkness, and maybe a warm cup of tea heated on the same stove that powers your headlamp. It's not flashy, but it's clever, and clever might be what you need most. But maybe you're not sitting on a pile of wood or you can't run a stove. Water, however, can be a game changer. Forget hydropower dams, which can take years to build and cost millions. Instead, imagine an old-school water wheel, but shrunk down to something you could carry in a backpack. Take a steady stream, a brook, a river, heck, even a good garden hose with decent pressure, and run it through a small, portable microhydro generator. The basic principle is the same. Moving water turns a turbine. The turbine spins magnets near coils of wire, making current. It's been done for well over 100 years. People still use these in the hills of Appalachia and the Alaskan outback, sometimes running a line from a creek a half-mile away, letting a little drop in height build enough pressure to keep their freezers humming day and night. Economically, small hydro is one of the best returns on effort if you have running water and nothing else. The gear itself isn't as cheap as candles, and you'll need to set up intake pipes and maybe clean out leaves from time to time. But if the water flows steady all year, you'll have a quiet, endless power supply. It doesn't take much. An elevation drop of even a few feet over 100 yards can sometimes be enough to give you continuous, quiet watts for years. Again, no solar, no wind, no grid, just physics, a little engineering, and patience. Let's raise the stakes. What if you have no heat source, no flowing water, and the world outside is as still as a painting? Most people don't realize human bodies, yours, mine, everyone's, are chemical engines. That's because, at the atomic level, everything is a battery. This leads us to another way to generate electricity: chemical reactions, using the simplest of materials found at almost any grocery store. Remember the potato battery experiment from middle school science? Turns out this isn't just for school kids. If you can wire up lemons, potatoes, or even salty water with some copper and zinc, you have a tiny, reliable electrical source. It's small. The actual voltage from a single fruit or tuber is less than what you'd get from the cheapest battery in a convenience store. But stack dozens together, series and parallel, and you can get enough voltage to run a radio, power a clock, or light a small LED. I know it may sound like a demonstration for a classroom, but in a real pinch, people have been known to use saltwater batteries, aluminum cans, old nails, and strips of copper pipe to keep critical communications going in remote war zones, on boats at sea, or even in high-altitude research camps. No sun, no wind, no grid. Just the stubbornness to not sit in the dark. The beautiful thing is, chemical-based electricity doesn't need anything fancy. It's not the long-term solution for a family of 4, but it does show an important economic reality. Human ingenuity, when pushed by necessity, finds ways to repurpose the simplest raw materials around. A lemon, a piece of copper, and a nail is not a generator, until you really need it to be. But let's say you want something a little more modern, maybe something you can tuck in a backpack and forget about until things get wild. Hand-cranked generators are older than the first telegraph lines, and you've probably seen those radios you wind up at camping stores or in emergency kits. Crank for a minute, get enough juice for important calls, or a half hour of weather alerts if the sky's going crazy. What's amazing is the hand crank doesn't rely on weather, climate, or local conditions. Your muscles are the grid. Sure, nobody's powering air conditioners with hand cranks, but with efficient LEDs and lithium-ion batteries, it's surprising what a few minutes' effort can accomplish. Imagine telling your great-grandparents, people who used candles every night, that you can spend 3 minutes twisting a handle and have bright, cold light for reading, cooking, even making that crucial late-night phone call when the snowstorm knocks out every pole in the county. Generating electricity becomes personal. It's about converting a little of your sweat into watts, a direct feedback loop of effort and reward. As you can tell, all these methods share a common thread: resourcefulness and making the most of what's at hand. It's never going to be as easy as flipping on a switch connected to the grid, and it's not going to power every gadget you own. But when the big systems fail, or you're far beyond the edge of town, there's a strange comfort in knowing you are not fully at the mercy of the elements or corporate infrastructure. There are always a few tricks left for keeping the dark at bay and the essential things running. Methods that have kept remote cabins in Alaska and explorers in the Amazon powered up for months at a time when nobody else could help. But these are only the beginning, and what you haven't seen yet is how a little cleverness and old-school know-how can stretch these modest solutions into something more reliable than you'd think. Now, if you've stuck with me so far, you're probably realizing that the question of electricity isn't always about how much you can get, but how creative you're willing to be. When you push past the first layer of obvious solutions, a world of odd but proven options starts to open up. And sometimes what seems boring is actually hiding the most reliable backup plans you can imagine. Plans that have quietly powered off-grid homes, small boats, even highway rest stops for decades, all without a solar panel or spinning windmill in sight. Let's go deeper and talk about something you probably encounter every day but almost never think of as a power source: heat from waste. Picture the typical restaurant kitchen or even a big hospital laundry facility. They create an enormous amount of hot water, steam, and warm air, and for the most part, it just drifts away into the sky. But with a little ingenuity, that leftover heat can be captured and turned back into usable electricity using a tiny device called an organic Rankine cycle generator. This isn't science fiction. Factories and remote communities have been quietly using these setups for decades, especially in places where fuel is expensive or supply chains are shaky. Here's how it works. Anytime you cook, heat water, or run a generator, you're producing exhaust heat. An organic Rankine cycle generator uses that heat to vaporize a fluid, could be something as basic as refrigerant from an air conditioner, that turns a small turbine as it expands. The turbine runs a generator, and that electricity can power lights, tools, or batteries. It's not the kind of power you're going to use for an Olympic-sized pool pump, but it's perfectly suited for a couple of hours of LED lighting, a laptop charge, or running some comms gear. What's fascinating is that you don't have to burn new fuel. You're using energy that's already there, just waiting to slip away unused. The economics of waste heat generation are plain. You're squeezing every last drop from energy you already paid for. In isolated clinics in Alaska and Canada, this trick keeps freezers running and phone towers powered, when every gallon of diesel has to come in by boat or plane. Similar tricks keep fishermen safe off the coast of Maine, running navigation lights all night, even when the engine is off, simply by recycling the engine's warmth from earlier in the evening. The biggest limitation here is heat. You need a constant source. But you'd be surprised how many places have heat going to waste, waiting for a second life as electricity. But we still haven't touched the simplest tool anyone can carry in their own pocket: batteries. Now, before you check out and think, yeah, but batteries don't make electricity, they just store it, hold that thought. In the world where there's no grid, no sun, and no wind, how you use and stretch your battery power becomes an art form. And surprisingly, you can make more electricity by scavenging and combining old, nearly dead batteries, something resourceful people have been doing since the first flashlight went dim in the 1920s. That's right, millions of nearly spent AA and 808 cells still have a little juice left, just not enough for power-hungry gadgets. You can wire them together in creative ways to squeeze out the last of their potential. Let's imagine you're out in the wild with nothing but a bucket of half-used batteries from remote controls in RC cars. If you test each battery with a cheap voltage meter, you'll find some are only half dead. Connected in series or parallel, those junk batteries can still power small devices, radios, or critical lights for days, something that can make the difference between comfort and crisis if you're stuck somewhere. There are even field guides and kits for these types of scavenger builds, where reusing thrown-away cells has become a cornerstone of off-grid survivalists and international aid workers in disaster zones. The moral of that story is clear. Power generation in emergencies is as much about using what's on hand as much as making something new. Innovation, when you're down to your last candle in a box of dead batteries, means you see value where most people see trash. That's as true for DIY hobbyists as it is for big off-grid economic projects in the deserts of Africa or the ice fields of Greenland. In both places, necessity and thrift are twin engines. Another approach that flies under the radar, sometimes literally, is vibration and movement generation. You know those little flashlights you shake to power up? The physics there is simple. A strong magnet slides back and forth through coils of copper wire every time you shake or move it. That moving magnetic field pushes electrons through the wire, creating power. On a small scale, it means a flashlight that works whenever you need it, no batteries required. But this method extends up to something much larger. In the world's busiest train stations, in Tokyo and London for example, companies have embedded piezoelectric floor tiles that generate small amounts of electricity every time someone steps on them. The average person's step isn't going to light up Times Square, but these tiles can charge emergency lights, sensors, or even advertise backlit panels, all based on footsteps on otherwise dead real estate. Translating this concept down to home or emergency use, you can find piezoelectric lighters and camping gadgets that create sparks and even small currents with nothing more than movement or pressure. Extend that, in any environment with repetitive movement, an old squeaky floorboard, a rocking camping chair, the swinging of a hammock, can become an offbeat power station if you're creative enough. All of these options, waste heat, batteries, vibration, work best in harmony with one another. Maybe one day it's just hand cranking, the next it's using your stove's warmth, and the next a tiny water wheel you rig to the neighbor's leaking hose. No matter the tool, the mindset is the same. Observe, improvise, and cobble together whatever gets the job done. It's the opposite of the plug and forget model the grid economy depends on. Instead, these are microeconomies of electricity, where every amp counts and nothing is wasted unless absolutely necessary. Now, picture for a moment how these scrappy off-grid technologies might come together on a bigger scale. Around the world, in villages from Nepal to Nicaragua, families have taken old car alternators, bicycle parts, and local streams to build microgrids that function with little more than wit, elbow grease, and the right pile of scrap. In a garage in rural Ohio, there's a retired machinist who collects car batteries from junkyards, solar garden lights with cracked panels, and broken generators, piecing together networked systems that can run a refrigerator, charge a laptop, and power a shortwave radio, all with a hodgepodge of rejected parts and no input from the larger power grid. For people on the economic margins, these aren't just nice-to-have gadgets, but essential lifelines. Medical gear, refrigeration, pumps for clean water, all pieced together outside of the official economy. Pause and think about that for a second. Globally, off-grid generation is a lifeline for about 1 billion people, almost 1 in 8 of us. Most of these people don't have access to government incentives or subsidies for solar and wind, and many live in regions where even a liter of gasoline costs a day's wages. In this world, scrapping together even 50 watts of power is nothing short of transformative. It runs communication radios, basic lighting, water filters, sometimes even enough for a community refrigerator. In some cases, tiny generators pulled from motorcycles provide backup power when everything else fails. Electrical independence isn't just about bragging rights or prepping. It's about survival, dignity, and economic opportunity, one hard-earned amp at a time. But even if you aren't off the map or in a remote rural village, these tools and mindsets have become quietly vital in the suburban sprawl of developed countries, too. After Hurricane Maria knocked out Puerto Rico's central grid, local volunteers built hundreds of neighborhood charging stations with everything from hand crank generators to micro-hydro setups in mountain streams. These mini microgrids filled the gap when official resources were slow to arrive, giving residents a way to charge phones, run medical devices, and print documents, all without solar or wind, just by repurposing whatever technology they could salvage or afford. And perhaps the most fascinating part of this whole story is how these low glamour solutions are slowly changing the assumptions of what counts as progress. Economically, the idea of centralized distribution, one giant plant powering an entire state, is facing challenges from below, not just by huge solar farms or offshore wind, but by millions of tiny creative workarounds people build with their own hands. These methods are not perfect, not always pretty, and sometimes only get you through a single storm or a long weekend without power, but they represent a form of economic resilience that goes far beyond any shiny government-subsidized energy project. If anything, the real lesson is that electricity isn't a purely modern luxury or something tied to high-tech infrastructure. It's a puzzle, solvable at almost any level if you step outside the mindset that you need solar panels or a massive windmill to keep life moving. With a little knowledge, patience, and a willingness to improvise, you can generate enough power to keep the essentials going, whether that's in a city blackout, a remote mountaintop, or a hurricane-battered suburb.